Hi, Elliot.
Good afternoon, Serge. Nice to meet you.
You've recently gone through a very big loss, and that's what we're talking about.
Yes, that is accurate. Um, my dad has passed away actually about 10 days ago, so it's a very recent loss, but it wasn't an unexpected loss because he had gotten to live a long and profitable life, and I think had come to feel that the human body is designed for a certain length of time, and he was reaching those outer limits. He was 98 years old.
Yeah. And so, what you have found yourself doing a lot during these past few days is to think about life, death, mourning, loss, and so maybe we're going to talk about these things.
Yeah. Okay. I'm happy to try to do that. I think I've become aware of my own skepticism about, grand theories of mourning, because I imagine people mourn in different ways. And in one way, I think that, I'm sort of struggling to be able to make sure that I hold on to this moment. And it's a way of trying to preserve the connection. I also am aware that there was fairly ample time in which this seemed to be the inevitable result. I think one interesting thing to ponder about loss is the way in which it has to remind you that this is not a fate that belongs to someone else, but it's a fate that belongs to you as well.
Yeah. So it's very personal. It just affects you at a direct level. It's not something,
Yeah.
It's not a loss, it's my loss.
Yeah. And, in another way, it creates, I think, a kind of crisis of meaning, right? Depending upon what kind of belief systems that you are partial to, and can look to help you through the process. But personally, I would describe myself as spiritual, but not particularly religious. And so that does put things on one's own shoulders a little more. But even there's a kind of challenge because I can't automatically say that I know what's meaningful in the universe. But on the other hand, it kind of prompts you to try to pay attention to that, right? It's like, pay attention, think, try to appraise like what is really meaningful to you.
Yeah. So another way to say it is to say for some people who are religious and say in any given religion, there is usually some thought that is given to put a whole system of meaning around life and death. And so when it happens, if you believe in that religion, then it all fits nicely within a whole view of the world. And in some ways, it's something that makes sense, that reinforces what you believed in and is a whole part of it. And when you don't, then there's a question of, well, how do I make sense of that? And that's kind of what the crisis of meaning is.
Yeah, no, I think the way I would put it is, the virtue of religious belief would be for whatever questions you have that they can provide answers, right? I also think it's a little more complicated in the sense that there's a lot of wisdom, accumulated wisdom, that's contained in religious rituals and practices that come out of, deep experience, right? So that's something I would want to recognize. But I would juxtapose the idea of I have questions, religion provides answers, but if you don't have religion, then you have to try to provide some of those answers for yourself,
Yeah.
right? Or to seek them amongst people who you know and care about.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, yeah, because you don't have the answers, and suddenly there's a big question.
Yes.
And most of us don't really spend a lot of time thinking about this, or we
Yeah.
are distracted by life. And so
Yeah.
at those moments, it catches you, really head front.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of always have been impressed by Nietzsche's perception that, we're not able to tolerate the reality of like the abyss and what we don't know. We couldn't get by life if we remained focused on that. So it's a good thing that we have many, many distractions.
Yeah. So to function, we need to be distracted, to
Yeah.
disconnect from that.
Mhm.
But the drawback of being disconnected is when we suddenly are faced with it, then
Yes.
we're not prepared. It's full
Yeah.
force.
Yes. That's right. That's right. Yeah.
And
Mhm.
so maybe, I'm not going to go to the answers, but maybe to the questions, because
Okay.
we're talking about crisis of meaning. There's the something. So what are the questions that come for you as you confront?
Well, I think, there's first of all the emotional attachment side of things where you kind of fear that if someone is no longer alive, that you no longer have a relationship with them, right? And so that's sort of terrifying. But I think the other questions have to do with that. We happen to live in a culture in which we're really encouraged to rapidly digest and to move on from loss. I think I would juxtapose that to, for example, not an expert about this, but my understanding is that in Japanese culture, that it's very common to have shrines inside the home with pictures in your living room of someone who has died in a way that I think in Western culture, probably American culture especially, that would seem morbid. So I'm very interested in the dialectic of the need to let go and to face that something irrevocable has occurred, and at the same time to find ways to preserve the connection, and that because someone is no longer physically alive doesn't mean that they can't be an active living presence within you.
Yeah. So very, very clearly that sense of a dialectic between two poles. And one is letting go, and that kind of generally our way.
Yeah. Mhm.
And on the other end, the idea of maintaining the relationship. And so there is a relationship
Yeah.
beyond
Yeah.
death.
Mhm.
There is a
Yeah.
presence, and not just a presence, but I think you're describing something like an ongoing interaction
Mhm.
that continues.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And, it's interesting because even in Freud's famous Mourning and Melancholia, he kind of leans towards the idea of, well, reality dictates that if someone is no longer alive, that you have to kind of give them up. And there is some kind of idea of internalizing someone, but it's sort of a later development, I think, in which that's really articulated. So that's part of the experience of recognizing how someone dwells within you, and that is abiding, and not sort of subject to someone's physical death. And I don't know. I mean, I think our motivation in life is often occurs in dialogue with people who have been internalized within us.
Yeah, yeah. So you're broadening the question from just the idea of what kind of a relationship we maintain with people who are dead, to the larger question to say, human beings, we don't just live in the moment. We
Yeah.
also have a whole set of stuff in the imagination of internalized people, so we don't live just in the moment.
Yeah.
And so that's part of that larger context.
That's right. I mean, and I would say this is where, what it means to have a self, right, is strongly influenced by the relationships that one has had. And that it's very important to appreciate the kind of role of the imagination, right, as something which helps us to sustain meaning.
Right. No, that's so maybe I'm going to try a slightly different wording to see if I get what you're talking about. In just everyday language, we'd say a relationship involves two people. If one of the people is gone, then that relationship is no longer there. And what we're talking about is to say, what? Even if the other person is gone, as long as I'm here, there's still a relationship.
Right.
Because there's something in me that
Right.
continues this relationship.
Yeah. Now, and I think everybody who has lost someone important to them, has these moments in which they kind of experience a food where they know that the person who is dead either kind of loved that or maybe hated it, but you feel that presence, and it's part of and informative of the way that you react.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, when we're talking about meaning, we're not just talking about meaning in the sense of what is life, what is death, but we're also talking about meaning, what it's like to be a human being. And, the role of past experiences as they carry forward in the present, the role of memory, the role of all of these internalized experiences that continue to live. And you're talking about, the experience in the present moment.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's correct. It also is sort of reflective of some of my research and scholarly work on emotions, which emphasizes that our emotions in the present are often influenced by emotional experiences that we've had in the past.
Yeah. So we cannot just stay at the surface and say everything happens in the moment, because we're human beings, because we have memory, because we have not just memory in the brain, but body memory and all of the nervous system influence, that we're constantly living in a present that is made up of an interaction with the past as well.
Right.
And that and it's not something that is static, that's something that's very dynamic. We relive it moment by moment.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I guess the one thing in what you said that is kind of a subject for further curiosity is whether we're talking about something which is restricted to human beings, or whether there are other animals out there, right? I mean, there is documentation of elephants mourning, for example. So that's an appreciation, of like loss, for example.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Which feels very grounding. Which feels to me, as you're pointing it out, something that feels that because it's a continuum. It's not an exceptionalism, and so
Right.
the sense of this is not something that's weird and peculiar to human beings,
Yeah, I think
but
human
it's
beings have gotten themselves in a lot of trouble by imagining that they uniquely
yeah,
experience the world in a certain way. Um, yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. So there's that negotiation that's going on
Mhm.
about being in the present, having the connection,
Mhm.
the pain that can come from the loss, but also
Yeah.
the enrichment that comes from the memory of the connection.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I would say, and this is definitely reflective of some of my interests, but in emotions, because going towards the pain, going into the pain, I think might in the short term seem like irrational, right? I mean, that in the face of pain, it seems like it makes more sense to go in the opposite direction. But I think there's a long term benefit of going into the pain when we're talking about experiencing the loss of someone who was dear to you.
Yeah, yeah. So what form does it take to go into the pain?
Mhm. Um, well, I think, I would say that the kind of pull of everyday life is so
Hmm.
seductive, taking us back into, like what we're going to have for lunch, or, what you're going to do over the weekend, or when are you going to see your friends and family, and all of that, is so compelling. And to preserve some space in which, as we're describing it, is reserved for thinking, right, and for having memories about the person. And that's interesting because, again, I mean, it might. There's no reason why it would only be positive or happy memories, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
But just engaging, having the appraisal of the relationship, because that really does matter to you.
So I want to just stop and highlight something because you used the phrase, making some space.
Yeah.
And so it's not something I want to have lost in the middle of the paragraph if you want, because it won't happen unless we make space for it.
Yes, that's right. No, I think that's a really important point, and I'm glad that you mentioned it, because you can sort of think that mourning kind of just happens, and I think it's more of a strenuous effort, although it also kind of has a life of its own. So you can't necessarily be in control of it, but you can make space for it and to welcome it when there is the possibility of engaging it.
Yeah, yeah. And so again, that's an interesting part that relates to the sense of what it's like to be a human being, that dance between what you can control, for instance,
Yeah.
making space, and what you can't control. So you can't really determine what
That's right.
intensity it will have, when it will show up, what form it will have.
Mhm.
And so that moment, that's something you experience,
Mhm.
that dance.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's right. Mhm.
Hmm. Yeah.
But I mean, I'm in an early phase, so we'll see if I can sustain it. We'll see how it evolves. It's a little unpredictable.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, yeah. And I know you've had other losses in your life.
Mhm. Sure.
And um, do you notice a sense of, um, I don't know, familiarity or some sense of help with the territory?
Yeah.
or does it catch you by surprise the same way it did?
Mhm. I would say it's different. That's very much tied to the quality of the different relationships that we're speaking about. So, what most impresses me is that it's not exactly the same.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. So if I had to, something that comes up for me that I want to share with you, and it might or might not be accurate, but the sense I have right now, if I had to summarize a bit what I'm hearing, is there's a part, I would say, that mourning period is a renegotiating of the relationship from the relationship between two living beings to a
Yeah.
relationship between one person and an internalized person, or some. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's a fair characterization. So thank you for that. The only thing I guess I would quibble with is I don't like the idea of a mourning period. Um, I think I'm inclined to try to develop the idea that mourning doesn't end, nor does it need to end.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And that complements something you said earlier in the conversation, the part about, not wanting to forget in some way,
Yeah.
because that would be, not right,
Mhm.
not doing justice to the value of the relationship.
Yeah. Well, that's where the meaning is contingent upon sustaining the relationship, right?
Yeah, yeah,
It's an enormous affront to a conscious being that being turns into non-being, right?
yeah,
And that's what we're talking about, non-being as antithetical to meaning. And so I think holding on to the significance of someone is the counter to that, to the threat of meaninglessness.
yeah, yeah. So very clearly, there's that sense of being equals meaning,
Yeah,
and not being equals meaningless. So, that sense of, if you're no longer there, you don't mean anything. If a person's not longer there, they don't mean anything. And
mhm.
so death erases meaning, is that whole concept.
Yeah, no, I mean, part of, the shock and the distress is just when you appreciate like all the entirety of someone's experience, right? Of what they went through, who they are, you know, kind of dissipates with their physical death, right? And if you share some of those memories and experience, you can preserve them. But there is a lot that just goes out of the world.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And so then it gets a little bit more of that dimension to where you were talking about the crisis of meaning,
Yeah,
because in some way, if when you die, you no longer there, you disappear in some way, what have you lived for?
yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. Well, hopefully, this is what I teach ethics, and we always talk about Aristotle's idea of happiness because it's a very rich idea of that it's a kind of ongoing process in life. It's not a single moment per se. But in that context, he brings up the wisdom of Solon. And the wisdom of Solon is that you have to wait till the end. Until someone has died, you couldn't really tell if they were happy because it's easy to imagine a person who, got along great with his partner, loved his wife, loved his children. Sorry to make it so conventional, but just for purposes of example. And then, just had a marvelous, wonderful life. And then something tragic happened right at the end. That's always possible. Now, Aristotle's response to this guy Solon is very important because he says, well, if we have to wait till someone dies, then that seems to me that you can't be happy while you're alive. And that doesn't seem to be something that we should accept.
Yeah, so that's a very interesting thing, putting it between two poles. On the
Yeah.
one hand, the final answer. On the other hand, that, yeah,
Right.
So there is that moment by moment experience of happiness.
That's right. I mean, that's why I hope this doesn't seem so morbid, but I always enjoy reading obituaries. Why?
Mhm.
You get the whole expanse of the human life, twists and turns, and it gives you a sense of the whole life.
Yeah, so it gives a sense of a thread, just like the Greeks had that notion of the thread of life that was woven. And so it gives you a sense of the arc of life
Yes.
and what that person did with their time.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. And so it's kind of related also to the notion of meaning corresponds to the interactions you have with others, with the world. What kind of mark have you made on the world?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
And so that the mourning we're talking about is recognizing that the person who passed has
Mhm.
left a mark that goes
Yeah,
way beyond
yeah,
the
yeah.
simply passing.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, no, that's an interesting way to put it. I think, that the deeds that one has done are live on and are things to remember you by. I kind of wonder, like, what's the relationship between just the person you are in relation to the deeds that you've done, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Or just like just your sense of being a person versus your accomplishments and your activities.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing you is something that goes beyond the accomplishments, and let me check with you if that I'm hearing
Yeah,
correctly. What I'm
yeah,
hearing is that, the accomplishment in some way could be an abstraction. And think what you're
yeah,
talking about is the impact that you've had on others.
yeah,
And so that in some way you still live in other people's
yeah.
psyche.
That's right. I think that's exactly right. I mean, we've all kind of had the experience of someone who you see their resume and they're enormously impressive, and then you meet them and they're not so great, right? And
Yeah.
so it's like who you are as a person. It's my hope that that really does matter.
Yeah. And so maybe, just I'm trying to slightly paraphrase a little bit what you say, but in that sense, at a moment like this, at a moment of loss, at a moment where there is this crisis of meaning, comes that thought of, who you are. Is what gives meaning to your life. And so what sustains you is those moments are a reminder
Yeah.
that what is important is what you're the way you're interacting with others to create something that's of lasting meaning to them.
Yeah. No, I think that's completely what I've been trying to say. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. Hmm.